Today I'm going to show you how you can go from shit to suck on the rower in literally under 5 minutes. And I'm going to use Jack, who I helped out recently with his rowing technique over Instagram, as a perfect example. So if you avoid the rowing machine at all costs because your technique feels awful, your lower back or your quads just blow up, you can't seem to find a way to get past the first 500 meters, and you just want to feel like you're doing something worthwhile when you're using the machine, then this is the video that you need to watch. And it's tips that I'm going to share on here that allowed me to pull a 2:42 marathon and a 6:17 2K. And the feedback Jack sent me after implementing these tips was pretty positive. I'll try and put them up on the screen somewhere. So let's get you from shit to suck in under 5 minutes. This is the original video that Jack sent me, and I picked up 4 things straight away: an arm drop / scoop, a deep knee bend, no hinging, and high heels. So let's go into those and pick them apart, and I'll make sure that you can see on the video as well what I'm watching. The first thing that I want you to have a look at is the arm drop at the end of each repetition as Jack clears his knees. Now, this isn't something that you necessarily pick up, but if I slow the video down and go frame by frame, what you'll notice is that he's still picking his arms up as he starts to drive away. Now, fundamentally, one of the key things we want when we're on the rower is to make sure that all of our efforts, all of the movements we're putting in, are driving that chain, that handle, forwards and backwards. But what we see, because Jack drops his arms at the very last minute, is that actually the first couple of inches as he presses away, as he pushes away, as he goes to extend, doesn't actually move the handle forwards or backwards. It doesn't drive anything. Instead, what happens is the handle goes from a very low position to a high position so that it can gain tension. And what this means is that effectively every single repetition, if you will, the first few inches aren't really doing anything. He's moving, he's tensing his leg muscles to start that drive, but it's not doing anything to the handle because there's no tension. Now, as a one-off here or there, that's not a big deal, but if you are spending a long time on a rowing machine or you're doing many intervals, then, 3 or 4 inches every single rep, when you might do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds across a workout, will probably very quickly add up. And it's just fatigue, it's just work without getting anything from it. And so the advice I gave to Jack was that it's okay to drop the hands a little bit. You don't have to have them completely straight, but you just need to bring them up before you start pressing away from the rowing machine itself. Next thing I picked up on, and this is really common, is a really deep knee bend. We get a deep knee bend because we think that we need to use our legs as much as possible, and this is true, but there's a few subtle details and differences that we want to have a look at. He gets good range of movement with the handle, or good stroke length, I should say, but that is a lot of stretch and a lot of loading through the quadriceps. If you've ever done high rep arse to grass squats or high rep pendulum squats, hack squats, anything where you get a really big range of movement, you know what that quad burning sensation is going to feel like. What we tend to see happen when Jack presses out of that initial part of the rep is that it's more akin to a leg extension than a squat. So leg extension where you're in the machine and you are just extending through the knee and bring your shin and your foot up. And the reason this is the case is because his heels are so high and his shin angle has gone past the vertical. So he can't press his feet down into the block because that would basically stand him up. Instead, what he has to do is he has to push his feet forwards into the straps to get his quads to fire him back. And it's just a very inefficient way of doing things. Again, picture if you've done like a heavy squat or a heavy trap bar deadlift, which is kind of similar, and then how much weight can you lift? How much force can you generate in that movement pattern than in a leg extension? Instead, and this is point number 3, and this was the big thing, what we want to do is we want to have some sort of hinge in place. Essentially, people talk about 3 parts of each repetition on the rower: legs, torso, and arms. And so the initial movement is all about getting as much leg drive as possible. And then you should be able to hinge and extend through your trunk. That's going to utilize your back muscles and your hip muscles. And then finally, you finish the movement off with your arms. But because of Jack's really deep knee bend, because of his high heel position, we end up with this really upright torso position. I'll see if I can draw some lines on it. And so what he's kind of forcing himself into doing is just using his legs and his arms and not even all of his leg muscles. And the reason why getting your technique a little bit better on the rowing machine makes such a huge difference is also the impact it has on everything else. You might use the rowing machine alongside other things if you're training for like a Hyrox or for CrossFit. And so if your quads blow up or your lower back blows up and then you go to do another movement, that movement quality is going to suffer for that particular exercise. You'll also be able to do fewer intervals because, again, you're going to tire out much quicker. Rather than having stress, work placed evenly across the body, taxing your quads, yes, but also your hamstrings, your glutes, your back muscles, your core, your arm muscles, you're kind of putting most of the emphasis on a few key muscle groups. And the reason Jack is probably doing this in many ways is because he knows that stroke length is important, i.e. how far the handle moves. That's why all elite rowers are giants, because how far you can pull the handle is kind of important. And so what I recommended he try doing is not worry about getting the seat too far forwards. Instead, I wanted him to get to a position where his heels weren't necessarily in contact with the foot plate, but were much closer than that. Allow his knees, his shins to not be driven so far forwards, and focus on leaning forwards at the front position a little bit more. And then as he extends his leg, extending through the trunk and getting a bit more of a lean at the back position, just a fraction. Segue for all you Hyrox lot or all you CrossFit lot who use a rower during your competitions. There are other reasons as to why you want to practice your technique and get it spot on. And that's because you can change your technique to better suit the competition that you're in. Now, I haven't done a Hyrox, but I've seen what happens in a Hyrox. I know what the stations are. I know there's a lot of running. And Jack's technique initially is making things so much more difficult than they need to be because there's so much direct quadricep work in Hyrox. You've got to run 8 kilometers, but you've also got your lunges, you've got your burpees, you've got your sled pushes, you've got 100 wall balls. I don't know that there's another muscle group that takes a beating quite like your quadriceps do. And so going on the rower and then smashing your quads more is a surefire way to make everything else far more challenging than it needs to be. So what I said to Jack was actually find a better technique, but then bias it the other way and experiment with it. Try moving the seat less. Try getting as little knee bend as possible and instead utilizing an exaggerated hinge. Use your back, your hip muscles and your arms. Now that is not what I would recommend in general because it's, again, going too far the other way and making your technique inefficient and less effective. But if you're doing a Hyrox where you're running 8 kilometers, you're doing 100 wall balls, you're doing all of these weighted lunges with a sandbag or a power bag on your back, and you're doing burpees where you've got to squat down and get up off the floor, you kind of want to give your quads a bit of a break any opportunity you get. So utilizing more of a direct hinge is going to fry your back muscles, your core, and your upper body more. But guess what? The next thing you're going to do is just go for a run anyway. So I said to Jack, play around with it. It might just give your quads a bit of a break because you're not loading them as heavily, you're not occluding them through that deep range of movement, and you can lean on other areas that can take a bit more of a beating so that when you get off the rowing machine and go for the run, your legs don't feel like jelly. You can save them for the sled push and all that sort of stuff. So Jack went away and had a little play with those techniques and he sent me an initial video before he went into Hyrox. It's not the best angle because it's at a front facing angle, it's not side on, but even now you can see some of the differences. First of all, the arm drop and scoop. Like, he's been really strict and really disciplined with that handle drop and it's not dropping at all. Now, he could let it drop a little bit just as it passes his knees, so about here, and then he could just pick it up before he starts to extend, but you can see there's no drop in that chain. That chain is on tension as soon as he starts to extend, as soon as he starts to work. You can see his heels don't come up so high. You can see he doesn't get as deep for a knee bend, but he still gets really good stroke length. It's hard to tell, again, from this angle exactly, thanks Jack, but it looks like the handle is maybe an inch or two away from its end point anyway. And you can see he's getting much more of a lean. There's going to be a lot less occlusion, restriction of blood flow on his quadriceps, which is going to make things easier overall in general. And he gets a really good lean at the back position. He puts a little thumbs up at the end, so I'm assuming he was happy with how it felt. So we can see those differences already. Jack then sent me his Hyrox videos when he did his competition. There's a good angle here until some chap walks in front of it. Open that up a little bit. Cool. So Jack told me that he played around with the exaggerated technique and went with the big hinge, leaning or trusting his back muscles and his arm muscles to do most of the work. So we can see a bit of an exaggerated position here. His shin angle is actually gone the other way. So beforehand, his shin angle was positive, I would say. And by positive, I don't mean good. What I mean is that his shin angle was past vertical, so it wasn't 90 degrees. Now he's got a negative shin angle. His knee is behind his toe, his knee is behind his heel. And what that allows him to do, as you can see, is get much more of a hinge forward. He's got general flexion throughout his spine, perfectly fine. Don't worry about rounding your back on a rower. You go and watch rowers, they round their fucking backs. Don't listen to anyone that says keep a stiff neutral spine. And going off a rant here, and you can see it's a really good lean. And the seat doesn't move. Why is this guy getting in the way? Piss off. The seat doesn't move a huge amount. Look, it goes from above the row, above where it says row erg, to maybe 6 or 8 inches. And you look at everyone else, and again, just behind him, what have you got? You've got a guy jamming his quads up, jamming his knees, all quads. Whereas Jack is just getting a little work through his quads. He's getting a strong position, and he mentioned that he intentionally utilised that hinge pattern, the hip muscles, the back muscles, the arm muscles more. Again, you can see it here. Chap next to him, deep knee bend, no torso hinge. Jack doing the complete opposite, mostly a hinge, mostly using his arms. I won't zoom in on the screen, but he's holding a much faster pace than the chap left to him anyway. And again, one more, same sort of angle, just from the other side. You can see how his technique has changed so much. That end position there. He's overusing the hinge, which is appropriate for Hyrox. He's changed his technique so that it helps him in that competition. And now he has the skill to kind of pick and choose what he wants to do with his technique, and that's what you should be able to do. If your back hurts a bit and you want to utilize your quadriceps more, you can go with that more squatty row technique. If you're in the middle of a Hyrox where you've got to get off the rowing machine and use your quads, you probably want to be doing the complete opposite. With the deep knee bend, you don't want to get your calves pressed up against your hamstrings. It's going to restrict blood flow to the quadriceps because you're going to be taken through a much greater range of movement, under load, under tension. You're going to be in a position where you can't press down into the foot plate. You kind of have to extend through the knee. Again, inefficient. You want to make sure you're getting that hinge. Like, your back is strong, your hip muscles are strong. It's not unusual the first few times that you implement that sort of technique and you start hinging a bit more, that you feel like your hamstrings and quads, hamstrings and glutes blowing up a little bit because they're finally starting to be utilized. And that's what we want. We want as many of the big major muscle groups contributing as possible. And then finally, high heels. That kind of ties into the overall position. It's okay to have your heels lift up a little bit. And if you're doing a short sprint for 30 seconds, it probably doesn't make any difference whatsoever. But if your heels are getting super high off that foot plate, then you can be pretty confident that you're reducing your ability to produce force. You're limiting what you can do because you can't then immediately press down into the foot plate. It's a bit like squatting on your tippy toes. Like, you want a solid base of support. You want a big base of support. You want your heels down and you want your toes down so that you can press straight down. And if your heels do come off, which happens, you just want to make sure it's not by much. The sooner you can get your heels back down so that you can get a full amount of pressure across the whole foot, the better. It's safe to say that the technique was night and day different and really made an impact, so much so that the rowing station, he rowed faster than he had before, and it felt like almost like a rest station. He came out, his quads felt fine, he smashed the rest of it, and that's what good technique allows you to do. If you've got the damper setting way too high, if you're overutilizing your arms and your grip blows up, or you end up with sore elbows and bicep attachments, like, you're going to have to do less training. If your quads blow up and after the first 500 meters you have to stop, you're going to have to do less training. So having good enough technique is really handy. Like, it doesn't take long. I sent Jack a few voice notes. I sent him across a few little annotations. I think I did like a 5-minute loom video, and then he did the rest himself. And these techniques, these changes, you can employ them like that. Like, it doesn't take super long to work this out. You can do it in 5 minutes before you start doing your rowing intervals. You can have a little play around. You can record yourself doing it and look back. And the difference it can make over the course of the weeks, months, and years is huge. And you don't have to be into Hyrox. You don't have to be doing CrossFit to benefit from this. I think realistically, I would encourage everyone, with all exercise that they're going to do, to strive to make sure their technique is good enough so that you are as safe as possible and that you are training as effectively as possible. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not here to tell you how to be an elite rower. I'm sure the way I row on the rowing machine is not how an elite rowing coach would coach rowing, but that's not the point. The point is you can do a few very simple things and go from being shit at something to just kind of sucking at it in no time at all. And right now, that's all you probably need. Like, fundamentally, if you can get your technique across the board on all exercises from shit to suck, or I guess I should say to being just good enough, Like that's all you need to do. Your risk of injury will be negligible. And the effectiveness of that particular exercise, whether we're talking about conditioning work like on the rower, on the ski erg, or we're talking about lifting weights with a barbell, like the effectiveness is going to skyrocket and go through the roof, and it will allow you to train harder and longer and more consistently. And those are the three things that matter most anyway. Jack, if you're watching this, thanks for letting an old meathead with beat up knees rant and ramble about how to use a rowing machine. Like I said, I was given some advice for free a few years ago when we did some rowing marathons for charity, and just a few subtle tweaks and changes just made a night and day difference. And so I just saw an opportunity to kind of pay it forward, I suppose. I'm not Jack's coach. He has his own coach. I'm sure that they go over this sort of stuff. I just offered him some free advice, no strings attached, just wanted to pay it forward. If you like this video, if you like these deep dives, like the video, let me know in the comments. I'll see you on the next one.